Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Marketing Management Money here with Ryan and Ethan. So, this is something that's been on my mind a lot, and I'm going to ask you for some advice. This is going to be a little bit more of a free-flow episode where I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer to the question that I have, but this is something that I've been dealing with on several fronts. One is working with a business, and one is a project that I'm actually working on. I'll share more details about the project that I'm working on because, you know, I can share as much as I want about it, right? So the question is when to give up on an initiative, on, you know, trying to push the envelope. There's the expression, you know, you've got the leading edge, or is it the bleeding edge? I always look at it and I say, you know, the guy who has to clear the path will always move slower than the guy who gets to come after him on a clear path. And so, you know, if you picture building a road and one guy's out there, you know, like clearing trees and moving rocks, and the other guy's out there enjoying the fruits of a nice path to just walk on. And so in business, we're always trying to push the limits, push the envelope, make something new happen. And the flip side is if you do nothing, you're going to die. Like if you're not innovative at all, you're going to die. And I'm going to put a definition of innovation out there, and then we'll turn it more into a discussion. But I think that Walmart is a really fascinating example of innovation, because you look at Walmart and you don't think innovation. There's nothing innovative about Walmart. But one of the reasons why Walmart became so popular on the onset, this is back when Walmart and Kmart were like going head to head, and Kmart was a much bigger company at the time. You know, originally right. Kmart was the kind of the powerhouse.
Yeah.
And so Walmart, they invested heavily in inventory management. They were very high tech, and you know, at a time, you could argue that they were the most high tech company on the earth when it came to inventory management. And so when you walk in the store and you look at, you know, all the same brands, the same mass produced items, and you think, well, there's no innovation here. I'm like, well, it was all on the back end for them. And there are countless examples of where, you know, innovation comes in. So you might not be selling innovation, but you still have to be innovative. If you want to survive as a company. So when do you push forward? When do you call it quits and say, okay, you know, we've dumped enough money. We're chasing a rabbit hole. We need to get back to the basics. And I don't know.
Well, and it's compounded when the one project is the whole project, right? So if I'm in a startup phase and this all hinges on it versus am I established and I'm exploring with some research and development, some other innovative ideas that the business over here has the cash flow to help carry this versus I'm investing my life savings, or I'm investing everything out of my bank account on this idea as I move forward, hoping that it's going to become something, right? So you're right. I probably would split those two apart, because a natural company doing R&D is a different model than like one of your scenarios. It's literally potentially a startup.
Well, okay. So let me share my scenario, and we can use this as kind of an example to discuss. So back in, I think it was 2006. I'd have to go through and dig to find out for sure, but I believe it was 2006. So at the time, I fairly newly married, and we had just finished a lease on our apartment, and we were going to move into a different apartment. And we were in between apartments for just a short period of time, and I didn't want to lock myself into a lease, and I needed just a short-term place to stay. So my sister said, well, come move in with me, and, you can figure out what you're going to do. And so it was perfect. Me and my wife were going to school at the time, so, a chance to get some free rent was awesome. So anyway, we went ahead and we moved in with my sister, and we got into this little ritual of every night we would play games. And one of the games that we would play often was that classic game of Clue.
Right.
And I started noticing, I mean, this is just how my brain works. I'm very analytical. I started noticing that Clue always gravitated to almost the same outcome. And it frustrated me because everyone would figure out the person and the weapon really easily, and then the room would take forever because there's more rooms and you have to travel to them. And so it was almost the luck of the dice of who could get to the room first, not necessarily how creative you are, with deductive reasoning and things like that. So I thought to myself, okay, there's a better game out there. We can do a better game. And so I decided to develop this game. And this is kind of like a side hobby that I've had. I love developing games. I've done it since I was a little kid. And so I developed this game based on how do you do a better murder mystery. And I actually came up with this game and the mechanics of it, and it was really coming together really well. So I submitted this game to a game publisher in 2008. The game publisher was called Cambridge Game Factory, if I say that correctly. They're no longer around after the recession. It was a guy out of MIT who was doing it. And after the recession, he decided that he was going to focus on engineering or something and not do the games and whatever. But so he was working with me, and we were going to publish this game through Cambridge Game Factory. And so I was pretty excited that, I was going to get a game published and everything. And then the recession hit. He focused on engineering, and long story short, I wasn't able to do this game. So anyway, I've never let this game go, and I'm like, okay, I should do something with it. And now I am, I'm like, okay, I'm going to actually manufacture this game. And as I'm manufacturing it, I'm wanting to do it very hyper local. So I'm using local printing, local manufacturing, and that's just kind of what I'm moving toward. So 20 years almost, I've been pushing on this idea, pushing on this concept. And every time I show people some, and I should clarify, that's not like day and night 20 years. There would be 3 years at a time where I'm like, yeah, I haven't touched it, So this isn't like all I've done for 20 years. But for a 20-year period of time, I haven't let this thing go.
But it's only recently that you've arguably heavily invested in it.
So prior to recent, I invested time. Now I'm into it with capital.
Right.
I've purchased some equipment. I've made commitments to companies.
Prototypes.
So I'm now, I'm actually contractually obligated, not significantly, but enough that if I back out, I have to, pay the difference of this contract. So yes, I am now invested into this. I still have not gotten proof of concept. The game works fine, but I don't have proof of concept on the manufacturing. So do I just keep pushing forward, having tenacity? Because, you look at successful entrepreneurs, they are tenacious. But there's also this idea of holding on to the wrong thing. It can kill you. It can kill your business.
So all right. So I'm going to ask some questions because.
Is this now a therapy session?
No, because, some things you say are red flags, but at the same time, they may not be.
And that's the challenge.
Right. So what research, belief, facts, numbers do you have that at some level, if you continue to pursue this, it's successful?
Okay.
Because you have some background on that.
I have some background on that, and I want to...
And that's, anyways, one of my points that I want to bring up is you're weighing that out. If you don't have data to back something, that might be a huge red flag to say, okay, maybe I should stop.
So,
but you have some data.
I have some data. Okay. So I've run an analysis of, and now mind you, this is a different type of game than what you would find if you went to a place like Walmart or Target and they have their game shelf and, you pick up the Monopoly and the, Ticket to Ride and Settlers of Catan and Scrabble and, every version of Uno you can think of. This is a different type of game. And so people the target market would be people that are, I would call them gamers, or I usually say Euro gaming because there was a big movement. It started with Settlers of Catan back in, I believe, the 1980s when a different style or type of game really started to develop. So anyway, looking at that target market, going off of what that target market purchases, I did an analysis of the top 100 games that are on the market today. And I actually put it into a spread. This is how nerdy I got, right? So I put it into a spreadsheet. Not only did I look at the price to make sure that I had enough of a price swing, because when I tell people, so I'm looking at charging a retail price of, $120, $140 retail price. And a lot of people are like, whoa, that's really expensive. And I'm like, well, there's a game right now that is a very popular game. It's selling for retail of just under $400. And if you're not a gamer, that seems ridiculous.
That's right.
So I guess for benefit of this podcast, I want to say know your target audience, because if you don't know your target audience, like if
you're just creating the game to create it, right?
Yeah. And so
let me stray for just a minute because
I thought we were already all over the place.
To bring another point home, because you may be looking at a retailer, or a gaming, or manufacturing, but what's interesting is I had a very similar conversation with a gentleman who's in the housing industry.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and through a housing, because right now most of the Mountain West, has a major housing crisis, and most communities need more houses. And so there's discussions happening about affordable housing, not an affordable meaning the average working person,
Sure.
not low income or subsidized. Okay, so the working person out there who's working at your local manufacturing, welding shop, grocery store, how do they afford a house right now? Because right now it's crazy. So affordable housing for the working person. What was really interesting is in my conversations with him and trying to better understand the housing industry from a contractor's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because you have government, you have contractors. I mean, you have multiple components that all have to come together to really make a decent housing development. He made the comment that before you build the first house and start that subdivision, you need to know who your target market is. What are the demographics? How much can they afford? What are their family sizes? It was interesting that he did the exact same thing that I didn't even think about. I thought just build houses, right? But from that perspective, that contractor, which they do huge developments, he actually said exactly the same things that you preach all the time, and that is target market. Who are they? And we're going to build it for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I don't care what industry you're in. And I share that example of saying, look, retail versus construction, they're still target marketing who they're building it and doing it for.
Well, and I think, so if you're on to the right target market, when you tell someone who's out of the industry, they should look at you a little puzzled. They should be like, really? That's your target market? And I'm not saying that you should have weird target markets. I'm saying that the reason why they should be puzzled is because it should be so dialed in that you're describing someone that they're like, I would have never pictured that, because you talked about the, the housing situation, and you said, okay, for working families. And most people would stop there and they would say, okay, my target market is working families. Medium household income is, and I forget where it's at right now. It's like $60,000 or $70,000 here in the state of Utah. And so you say, okay, that's my target market. Is anyone who makes $60,000 or $70,000? And I'm like, no, that is not your target market. That's a piece of it.
That's right.
And then you need to start looking at it, and you need to say, okay, who's really making the buying decision? Is it the husband or the wife, or maybe it's non-traditional families? You know, how many people, because you go back 10, 20 years, it was always husband and wife, husband and wife. Now you have people that, their boyfriend and girlfriend, or, boyfriend, girlfriend, girlfriend, they're buying a house together.
That's right.
And you would have never seen that 20 years ago. It would have been weird. But today, it's not. So maybe, that could be, and you're starting to get into the psychographics of, okay, what are this person's relationship choices? What age are they when they're getting into a relationship? And understanding that, and how confident do they have to be in their job prospects? Because that's a huge buying decision. Is, I might have the money, but if I don't trust my job's going to be there in a year, I look at the programming industry right now, computer programming, coding, oh my gosh, it is just on fire, but the turnover there can be horrible. And so, I know guys that are clearing six figures and they've been laid off 3 times in 5 years. And so, like, do you want to buy a house? So I'm off on a tangent.
Well, so you isolated gamers down as a target market, okay, and then you've done a lot of research around them, what they're willing to pay, what are some of their favorite games, so you've done a lot of homework about them specifically doing that, and then you base the model around that. But now you come into, now you got to have production costs because you have to produce it now.
Well, hang on. I want to go back to the gaming target market and demographic, because this is where I make my first forecasted prediction. And it's important to make forecasted predictions, but what am I basing this on? I don't know. Okay, so I'll give the tangible of this. You said, I know gamers and I know what they want, and I'm like, yeah, I know people that they literally have a wall of nothing but games. I guarantee there are games on that wall that they've played once or twice, and they're still paying $80 for that game, and they keep buying more games. That's their thing. And this is not, like, oh, here's the one person who does this. Like, this is fairly common. You get a lot of closet gamers. It's weird when I talk to people, they're like, oh yeah, I'm a gamer. It's almost like, what's the passcode to do this? So anyway, Eurogaming became popular because it introduced a level of strategic thinking that has enough of a chance element to it that it's not always the smartest player who's going to win. So you take chess, right? Chess is pretty much, whoever knows how to play chess better is going to win. And so it's very frustrating for someone who isn't as good of a chess player, because you get pummeled because, it's so logical, right? And so they introduce enough chance to it that it just tips the scales so that it's not always the same outcome. And then there's also this idea of play where it needs to develop quickly. So you take some classic games like Monopoly and Risk. My kids actually wanted to play Monopoly on Sunday, and so we sat down and played Monopoly. And I remembered why I don't play this game very often. Like, it was...
You have 3 kids that now hate you.
I did win, yes. So it was obvious that I was going to win this game, and it took another 45 minutes for me to win.
Yeah.
And so Eurogaming they try to eliminate that, death by 1,000 cuts kind of, game. And they say, okay, we're going to go for a quick finish. When someone gets the advantage, they finish off within very few turns. So you don't just keep going around and being like, do I have to? Okay,
Right.
So anyway, so you've got these mechanics that really exploded this new genre of games. This is my forecast, my prediction. I think that people are a little tired of this, and they're looking for something new. This has been going on. It was, big in the 90s and the 2000s. Here we are, 2023. I had to think about that. And I think people want the next new.
Right.
Well, now I'm trying to guess what the next new is. I'm trying to do something that is different. So the game that I've created, it has some of those mechanics, but it also has some unique mechanics to it. And so that's the problem. Is you ask me, you're like, okay, does your target market want this? And I'm like, yes, I think.
Maybe.
And if I go with the safe bet, I'll never win big because that idea is saturated, But if I go with the risky bet, it's a risky bet.
Well, but anything innovative has a high level of risk to start with. Otherwise, it's not innovative.
I think a great example, and I'll let you keep going because I've been rambling on for a second, but a great example is smartphone technology.
Right.
When smartphones first came out, whoa, I mean, that was so cool. And those companies made a lot of money on those, right? And now, what's the difference between the, iPhone, what number are we even at?
15.
15?
Yeah.
Okay. The difference between the 14 and the 15 is like now in a bigger screen.
Yeah.
Cool. Now in blue.
Now in titanium, it's lighter.
Yeah.
Which I do want one. I love titanium.
So
that's another story for another day.
But so that's kind of the dilemma is, okay, do you push the envelope? Do you be the new, touch screen technology that really changes, cell phones?
Yeah, well, I always encourage people that you need to explore that, even though you never know how the consumer is going to react. Because there's been a lot of actually interesting innovations that have come out that consumers have said, nah, it's not, it's too cumbersome, or it's not moving us to the next direction. It's not, you know what I mean? Like cameras on phones, that innovation is almost now decimated the high-end camera market.
Sure.
And it's going to probably continue to do that because the cameras on phones are becoming pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's, we can look and show areas that have done it. However, so now getting back to yours, because if we're going to stay on innovation and when you call it quits or not, okay, at some point in time, you have to create a prototype. You can stay with an idea all you want, but ideas, if you go look at the U.S. patents, there are millions of patents that just the idea on paper was put down, but a prototype was never created.
Yeah.
And my argument is you can never move to the next level until you get the prototype, which means you have a cost to invest in that prototype.
Yeah. Well, okay. So here's a little bit, and this is just coming from my personal experience. However, when I say personal experience, I'm expanding beyond just the game because I've worked with other companies on getting products out there and their prototyping process. Prototyping is so expensive, and you need to plan on this.
That's right.
So, you look at this, and so for brevity's sake, I'm going to say that I'm trying to manufacture my game for under $50 per game. Like, it's expensive to actually manufacture this, very expensive. And I know that there are things that I could do. Again, I'm trying to go hyper local, and so I know that that's adding cost to it. But there's a lot of components to the game, right? And so if I'm trying to stay under $50 for that, and I don't think I'll be able to do it. Like right now, my current expected costs to manufacture are just over $60 per game, right? And so I'm looking at this. My costs to prototype are closer to $2,000, and so.
Well, but that's not even. I'd make an argument. That's not even counting your.
That's not
intellectual property, your brain power, and your time.
No, this is strictly
hard costs that I forked out to someone else.
Yeah. So if I've got something that I'm trying to sell for not trying to sell for $60, I'm trying to sell it for like $120, $150, right? But to prototype that thing, it should be a $60 unit, it's $2,000 to prototype, and I'm not done,
Right.
And so, if you look at this, I would say you're going to have a factor of like times it by 50 to 100 to get an idea of what it's going to cost you to prototype something relative to its cost.
Did you have a limit when you started the prototyping process? I never asked you that question. I mean, did you even a soft number in the back of your head, like, all right, as I look into this one, if it starts to get above this one, I have to call it quits?
So $3,000 was what I put down, and I said, if I can't get something off the ground for $3,000, now these are pretty small numbers, but I'm dealing with a single game, right?
Right. You're just trying to create one.
Yeah.
And then if logistics work out after that, then you'll invest more to mass produce something.
Yeah. And so I'm looking at this and I'm saying, okay, $3,000. Now, I should also clarify this. I have a very different style. So I've worked with a lot of prototypers, and I've seen people. So I'm on the very low end. I try and keep my costs very low. So one of my business philosophies is make it more difficult for yourself. It's kind of like a training philosophy. So if you see those sprinters and they'll wear like the weighted vests and then they go sprint so that when they take the weighted vest off, they feel like they're lighter and they can go faster. I use that same kind of philosophy in business. Is I'm like, okay, make it difficult on purpose. Give yourself restrictions so that you have to think through and really problem solve. I know a lot of people, the fail fast concept where they're just like, no, just throw the money at it. Some businesses are in a position to do that, where they're like, okay, we're going to go big with this. And so anyway, for me to get a prototype out, I said, if I can't get a prototype out for $3,000 on a board game, then, I don't know if I could give up. That's the problem. I'm married to this idea. 20 years.
Well, all right. So staying on the same subject and switching from startup, one type of a product to, because there's another component that you have dealt with on another side of your life where you work with manufacturers who have an R&D side of their organization that explore this same issue, even though the risks arguably are not as high because we have income that's already coming in.
Yeah.
So talk about that one as well, because someone might be a little bit bigger and needing to explore that. We have an established product. We have income coming in. It's not an isolated one thing that we're just trying to get off the ground.
So great thing to consider. And I want to, we alluded to this, but I really want to dive into this. When I say $3,000, these are just capital costs. There is no labor or intellectual property that is going into this. Now, I'm doing this as a hobby. And if I were to look at the amount of hours that I've put in over the years, oh my gosh, I would probably be into this thing, I don't know. It's over 1,000 hours. I guarantee that. It's probably like 5,000 hours, And that feels like a lot. That's probably too much. But I guarantee that I'm over 1,000 hours. So anyway, if you're in a company, you're paying a wage to those hours. Like me, I'm treating this as a hobby, and I'm like, okay, I'll just chip away at it, right? But if I'm in a company, I'm paying for those hours, and I see this happen a lot when people innovate something. Now, you mentioned that they have an R&D department. I'm actually going to counter that with most people that I see do this don't have an R&D department and don't think they're innovating. They just have an idea. Owners of the company,
they're trying to make a product better.
Yeah, like you get an owner of the company who, they're in the back tinkering on something. Right. And they're like, this isn't R&D. I don't do all that fancy R&D stuff. I'm like, oh, that's what you're doing right now. Or, trying to improve a software. I see companies spend a lot of time. They will invest serious money into software, and then they'll spend the next 2 years trying to get familiar with this software. And I'm like, okay, so you paid $20,000 for that software program, or I mean, it could be significantly more than that. I mean, I know people that have paid $300,000 to $1 million on a software program. Like, whew, that's right. And so, but I'm just going to say, you paid $20,000 on the software program, keeping it a little bit more in line with where most small businesses are shopping, right? And then you're going to spend the next 2 years trying to implement this. And so first off, the highest paid employees in the company are the ones that are spending the time on this. And so, you're looking at a wage that could be $50 to $100 an hour, depending on what their, salary package is or their owner's draw might be. So $50 to $100 an hour. And then I'm doing this for 2 years. I get that it's not full time, but still, I could dump in another 1,000 to 3,000 a week, times that by 50 weeks, and I'm now into this thing another few $100,000 of learning curve of expense that that went to a labor cost. And I hope that, if you're listening to this, I hope you understand that I'm throwing out some very quick hypothetical numbers. These numbers are not based on, case studies or specific examples. I'm just throwing out hypothetical numbers to illustrate a point, to say that, your software cost is not your most expensive cost. It's the implementation that is going to...
Labor almost is always the expensive. However, I have run into some scenarios where they need a new piece of equipment in order to create that innovation. And my argument is always never buy that piece of equipment unless it can do more than just the innovation you're wanting it to do.
Yeah.
Right? If it enhances other parts of your organization, I'm fantastic with it, because if that one innovation doesn't come to fruition, now you're trying to figure out, how do I use that piece of equipment now that this one is not going to produce the revenue that we thought it would? But if I know that it can do other things in the meantime and make me more efficient on other things, fantastic. Those are the best case scenarios when it comes to equipment.
Yeah, and I mean, old equipment, it works really well because everyone knows how to use it. They know how to repair it.
Yes.
And you might, improve efficiencies by 20% on new equipment. Again, just throwing out a number. But if you're improving efficiencies by 20% with this new piece of equipment, but your learning curve is costing you 30%, you're now down 10%. Yeah. That old clunky piece of equipment was more efficient than this really fast, and so that gets interesting. So that brings me to this question, and there's still a lot that I have on this episode. I don't know if this is going to bleed into a second one. We'll see. But when do you call it quits? When do you say, hey, because you asked me, like, do I have a threshold? And, well, let me be honest about that $3,000 threshold. That was a number. I ran a calculation of what I estimated it would cost to get this off the ground. So is it a threshold? No. It's an estimated cost. If that doesn't work, I probably will put more money in.
So this is my...
I'm married to this. Should I be married to it?
Well, this is always going to be my argument to anyone when they get in that scenario. And I use the... if I'm going to Vegas, okay, and I know I'm gonna gamble, I set aside my $200 or whatever it is that I'm gonna gamble with, and when it's gone, it's gone.
Dude, right? You haven't been to Vegas for a while. $200. I was like, I
haven't.
That's 30 minutes.
But, you're done. But that number that I set aside was the number that I said, okay, if I lose this, it's not going to affect anything else I do. I know that's conservative. Now there's some flex in there, but generally the rule of thumb is at some point in time, your investment, if you don't get to a level where you can see return coming back, okay, you can go down a road that's going to cost you significantly more than just the loss of a project.
So let me put it into a different framework, because I think this is, I get what you're saying with the whole gambling thing, but the problem is the gambling thing, you're going into it expecting to lose the two. You should be going into it expecting to lose the 200.
No one does, though.
Well, okay. Can I move it to the stock market?
Even though we kind of know that we will. Yeah, the stock market.
So
you never think you're going to lose in the stock market.
So to me, gambling is entertainment, right? And I get that. We could do a whole episode on the psychology behind gambling and the different personalities and all that kind of stuff. And yes, a lot of that transfers over to business and the stock market. But I want to talk the stock market for a second. So I buy a stock. Right? And I'm now invested in this stock, and I expect that stock to go up. Well, sometimes that stock goes down. Or here's the better question. Even if it goes up, when do I sell? When do I sell? Now, if you're a smart investor in the stock market, you've followed patterns, because the stock market has so much data. There's infinite data about when to buy, when to sell, what strategies to use. And so you could find a formula and plug it in and say, I'm following this person's method, or, I'm using this software, and it alerts me when it's a good time to sell, or whatever, right? In business, we don't have all of that nice packaged data. Now we should. We started off this episode, you were asking me, what data did I get?
Well, and the more innovative the idea is, the less data there is, unfortunately.
And so, yeah, it's nice to say, okay, here's my gambling budget, and when it's gone, it's gone. But on innovation, I don't feel it works that way, because what happens is you make strides forward, and you're like, okay, we're moving in the right direction. If this goes big, it'll go big. So with this game example, I actually, my brother, he was interested in the game. He's like, "You've been working on this a while." I'm like, "Yeah, I've been working on this a while." He's like, "Can I dump some money into that?" And I told him, I'm like, "It's not a good investment. like this is not where to dump your money." And he's like, I'm not investing in the money. I'm investing in you. Like, I want to see where this goes. And he's like, and I'd like to be part of it. And so I told him, I'm like, let me think about it, right? And so I put down some scenarios for him. And I said, look, I'm only looking at the money side of this. I said, there's about, a 20, 30% chance that any money that you give me is just going to be gone. And I said, and there's about a 60-ish% chance that it'll break even. Like, you'll put some money in, we could probably sell enough games to get that money. We're dealing with small numbers, right? And I said, and there's like maybe a 5% chance that this is going to go anywhere. And I'm like, that's why I'm saying this is not a good investment. And so he says to me, he's like, so you're telling me that I got like a 65% chance that I either break even or it goes somewhere? Sounds good to me. I'm like, well, yeah, but most of that is break even. And he's like, but again, I don't care. And so he was willing to, support the innovation because, like it felt like there wasn't a lot of downside risk to it. But that's kind of how we get into the stock market is, we'll be in the stock market and we'll say, oh, sure, I could lose everything in the stock market, but, and then we invest in the stock market.
But still, don't you feel that there is, at some level, you should set some budget?
So with his money, I did, so he's like, I want to put some money in, I want to support this. And so I put together, a written agreement, and I'm like, okay, this is how much money you're putting in. This is where the money is going to be spent. If this happens, this is the money you'll get back. If it doesn't happen, like, I'm not giving you anything back. He's like, I'm okay with that. And I made him sign it. Even though he's my brother, I'm like, I made him say, that was actually his request. He's like, we're signing something, you know. And I'm like, okay, you know, I think that's a good request. And so yeah, we have on paper, these are the threshold. This is when this is when you make money. This is when you lose money. This is, you know.
But you're far enough along in the prototype stage that you're going to actually produce some and take them to market.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's a high enough level of confidence through everything that you've been doing so far, and the investment into it hasn't broken the budget to where you can't take something to market. Okay. So at what point in time when you take it to market now, because that's the last stage of this, do you say, okay, it is or isn't going to make it, and I should cut my losses?
So that one's difficult. I was actually talking to my brother, and I said, hey, we're looking good to get an initial run. We're gonna produce about 50 games. And he's like, cool. He's actually already pre-sold 2 of them. And so he's like, yeah, you know, this is great. I've been telling people about it. They're excited. And he's pre-sold them at that expensive price. They're like, oh yeah, we don't care, you know. And so the problem comes in, and this is where I don't think people recognize, this is a whole cash flow thing. Like, if you want to understand the challenges of cash flow, try and launch something like this, because you've got the prototypes, you've got the R&D, then you have to do the inventory.
Right.
And by the time I get any of that money back, you know, and the funny thing is so if I'm going to stay with these onesie twosies, no big deal. It jumps up pretty quickly. Like, we were looking at doing a show. We've got a show coming up that would be a great place to showcase the game. It'd be a lot of fun. You know, we're looking forward to it. And I sat down with him. I'm like, hey, you know what? To do this show, it's $20,000. And all of a sudden, it's like, we went from a hobby to, okay, you know, one show. Are we going to invest $20,000 into that show? And it you know, it starts to compound pretty quickly. Now, here's the crazy thing, and this is a really important takeaway. I'm dealing with a small nothing. If you're a business, right. You know, like and I'm using this example not to say, hey, you know, here's a great business example. I'm using this example because I can talk about it openly and give some specifics. You know, I've got a business that I'm working with that they are looking at doing a product launch, and just to test the waters, I ran a calculation for them, and I said, if you can test the waters for under $250,000, that'd be pretty impressive. And this is for technically 4 products. You know, 2 products with 2 different variations of that.
And that's not uncommon if you're an established organization.
Yeah. And so when I'm sitting here saying, oh, $20,000, that's because that's coming out of my personal back pocket. That's not I'll do some tax write-offs on it and whatnot. But yeah, that's coming out of my personal back pocket. But if you get into a business and it's like, yeah, are you willing to put down your $400,000 to see if this product is going to work? Yeah. And that's not uncommon. Those aren't big numbers. You know, those are like, I'm a small business, I'm trying to do something, you know, and it gets crazy, you know. And I just talked to a guy, this is unrelated to manufacturing something, but I just talked to a guy that told me that I don't remember if it was his father or father-in-law, invested in a business. The market shifted on him. He lost the business, and it was his retirement.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
I've seen that scenario at least 5 times in people I've had worked with or had conversations with.
Because if I'm a small business and I need $400,000, where do I get it from? Retirement. Look at all that money sitting right there.
Well, and we have, right now, you're kind of on the tail end of the last of the baby boomers that are retiring. But I'm finding a lot of baby boomers aren't really wanting to retire per se. They still want something to do, and they're investing in now hobbies and other things that they think can make a living that don't feel are as time consuming or restrictive, or they've always wanted to do type of a thing. And because most baby boomers have been really loyal to organizations. That was one of their characteristics, is high loyalty. Yeah. The younger generations don't have any of that.
Right.
So So now that they no longer have that loyalty, now they're exploring some of their own stuff and using their own cash to invest in it. And I've seen at least 5 in the last 10 years that have gone bad, really bad.
Yeah. Yeah. And then
now they live off of their kids.
Which goes back to, and we're going to wrap this episode up. So maybe we'll do some well, I guarantee we'll do some follow-up, because I'm going to let the audience know when the game is ready, and I'll show off the game, because I think it's gonna go through. I've got one major piece of the manufacturing that has not been solved. Everything else is minor pieces that I'm like, yeah, I think it's just a question of working through that. There's this one major piece that I'm like, I'm confident that it will go through, but that's just me being confident. If I were to put real numbers to it, I'm like, yeah, there's honestly like maybe a 60% chance of success, which means there's 40% chance of failure out there.
Well, and the last piece I would bring up is you've kind of looked at those stages you've gone through, that a lot of people get to that point. Now they're ready to hit the market. But in this whole process, they failed, or you have failed to say, all right, how much money do I need to be allocating earlier in this game for marketing? Because you can think you can do it through a social media effort, and to some degree you can, but there's still money involved if you actually want to get it in there and get it into especially if there's a target market in front of their face.
So here's the stupid thing. I do this professionally. I have an advanced degree, like I've got an MBA in entrepreneurship. I do a podcast. I consult with businesses. Professionally, I do marketing strategies. And I overlooked that. Because I'm looking at people ask me all the time. They're like, well, how are you going to sell your game? I'm like, I don't know.
Well,
I'll figure that out.
I don't know that you've overlooked it, because you've done a lot of
homework.
homework.
Overlooked it.
You think you've overlooked it so much that
I've neglected it. Maybe I should say it that way. I haven't given it the attention that I should. If I was consulting me as a business, I would say, where's your marketing plan?
To support your argument, I would probably say you've made the classic example that you get so caught up in the research and development and the prototypes that finally when you have something, it's kind of like, oh, I got to market this, right? Instead of, wait a minute, as I'm going through this one, okay, I've got to have money for marketing. I've got to make sure that I don't touch certain pots or allocate money, because it's amazing how it just creeps up on you.
And that's a really good, maybe we'll wrap up with that, because that's an excellent takeaway. Is I don't care if you're doing something on the side, and this is where it's more critical, if you are in a business, especially if you're the owner, the one who's ultimately making decisions, you're going to get caught up in whatever piece you're going to get caught up in, and you will ignore something. And so, the marketing is a typical one, because the R&D is fun, innovating, like you're building stuff,
and
you're
start
making
to
stuff.
See prototypes coming out or things coming together.
But even beyond the marketing, I think the bigger one that gets ignored is the inventory management.
Yes.
Because there's nothing sexy about that. Like, innovating something is sexy, marketing something is sexy, managing inventory is not.
And how many times have you seen this? And we probably really need to wrap this up and have more conversations, but how many times have you seen someone finally gets their product, they order it, and X amount of units show up at their house, and they're like, where do I put all this?
Oh, yeah, storage.
Right? Because if I'm going to sell it at some point in time and I have to produce it at some level, I have to store that somewhere, and all of a sudden their front room becomes their storage shed.
Well,
they're selling the product off.
I had this, man, we're doing so bad at ending this. So one of the companies that I'm working with, they have told me that they will do processing. So they'll take all of the inputs for the game, and they're going to process it into a final product, ready for sale product. And I'm like, great. And so I just checked that off the list, and I'm like, okay, I've got my processing taken care of. We're okay. Well, so I have a conversation with this company and start finding out that, there's the storage aspect, because are they delivering it back to me? And, next time, like if you're watching the video of this, next time you're going to see a stack of boxes behind us. You know, are they
Right.
delivering it back to me? Is it
That'd
being
be
stored there? Who is doing all of the logistics of shipping? So, you know, if I sell
Right.
online,
Yeah.
are they going to run logistics for me, or do I have to drive down to their place and be like, "Hey, I need to take some of these and you know, and drop them off at
Shipped.
the
Yeah.
post office?" Like, companies have full on logistics, and it's a full-time person who works
right.
their butt off. Like, that is a complicated position to be in.
Right.
So, all right.
I'm not saying anything else.
I don't know that we solved any problems today, but we hope you enjoyed this episode. There will be some sort of follow-up. I don't know what that follow-up will be.
I think we need to have a follow up to this one. We'll figure it out
Yeah.
because there's a lot more discussion that can be had.
So, okay. Well, thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you guys next time.